It was a Friday night like any other, and my parents had gone out for a dinner party, leaving me alone in our cozy suburban home. The house was nestled at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by a dense forest that always seemed to be whispering secrets in the wind. I had always loved having the house to myself. It was a rare opportunity for solitude and relaxation. I decided to spend the evening curled up on the living room couch, engrossed in a good book and lulled by the gentle patter of rain on the windows. But little did I know, this night would be unlike any other. As the hours ticked away, the house grew darker, and the storm outside intensified. The rain turned into a torrential downpour, and the wind howled as if trying to force its way inside. I was so absorbed in my book that I didn't notice the gradual change in the atmosphere. It began with a subtle shift, like the air in the room had grown heavier. I dismissed it as my imagination, blaming the chilling passages in my book for my unease. But then I heard it, faint footsteps, as if someone were pacing in the hallway just beyond the living room. My heart quickened, and I lowered the book. I called out, thinking it might be one of my parents returning early, but there was no answer. I sat in the dimly lit room, listening to the slow, deliberate footsteps, each one echoing in the silent house. Unable to bear the suspense any longer, I ventured into the hallway, my footsteps faltering as I noticed that all the doors leading to the outside were still locked. The storm outside raged on, its ferocity matching my growing dread. The footsteps led me to the basement door, which stood ajar. The basement was a place I had always found eerie, and I rarely ventured down there. The air grew colder as I descended the creaking stairs, my heart pounding with every step. In the dim, flickering light of the basement, I saw it, a black screen, hanging on the wall. It was unlike any screen I had ever seen before, its surface shimmering as if it were a portal to another world. As I approached, the room seemed to close in around me, as though the very walls were pressing in. The black screen displayed a reflection of my own living room, but it was distorted, as if I were viewing it through a twisted lens. I watched in terror as a figure materialized in the reflection, its movements synchronized with mine, like a sinister doppelganger. The figure turned to face me, its eyes hollow, its lips curled into a grotesque grin. It reached out a hand through the screen, and I could feel a cold, skeletal touch on my shoulder. It whispered, "I've been waiting for you." With a surge of terror, I pulled away, stumbling back up the basement stairs. The footsteps behind me grew louder, and I could hear the figure laughing, its voice a malevolent cackle. The house itself seemed to conspire against me, the walls closing in, the ceiling descending. I burst into the living room, gasping for breath, my heart racing. The footsteps continued to echo in the hallway, but there was no sign of the figure. The black screen had disappeared, and the storm outside had subsided. My parents returned home shortly after, finding me in a state of shock. I tried to explain what had happened, but they dismissed it as a vivid nightmare. I wasn't so sure. To this day, I cannot forget the horrors I witnessed in our own home, the black screen that seemed to serve as a portal to a nightmarish dimension. I cannot shake the feeling that the figure in the reflection is still out there, waiting for its next victim. And so, I warn you, my dear audience, to be wary of the screens that hang in your homes. For within their depths may lie a portal to a realm of pure terror, a place from which there is no escape. In a quaint little town named Willowbrook, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there was an old Victorian house that had long been abandoned. The locals spoke of it in hushed tones, tales of a dark and cursed history, a place they dared not approach. They said it was haunted, but I, ever the skeptic, decided to spend a night there, home alone, to prove them wrong. My parents had gone out of town for the weekend, leaving me to my own devices. I couldn't resist the temptation to challenge the town's superstitions and urban legends. Armed with a flashlight, a sleeping bag, and a hint of arrogance, I entered the abandoned mansion. The air inside was heavy with the scent of decay and neglect, and I couldn't help but shudder at the eerie silence that enveloped me. The grandeur of the old house was still evident, despite years of neglect and decay. Faded wallpaper clung to the walls, and old portraits stared at me with eyes that seemed to follow my every move. As night fell and darkness descended upon Willowbrook, I settled into the master bedroom. The moon cast an eerie glow through the dusty windows, illuminating the room with a spectral light. I lay on the floor in my sleeping bag, my flashlight nearby, determined to prove that the house was not the place of horrors the townsfolk believed. But as the hours passed, I began to hear it, a faint, mournful melody that seemed to emanate from within the walls. The haunting tune crept into my ears, its notes twisting and contorting as if played by phantom hands on an ethereal piano. I told myself it was just my imagination, the echoes of the past in an old house, but the music was real, and it grew louder with every passing minute. Unable to ignore the music any longer, I grabbed my flashlight and followed the sound through the dark corridors of the house. It led me to a room I hadn't explored earlier, a small parlor with a grand piano covered in a dusty sheet. As I entered the room, the music crescendoed, and the sheet covering the piano was lifted by an unseen force. To my astonishment, the piano keys began to play by themselves, the melody becoming more urgent and melancholic. I stood in disbelief, my heart pounding, as the ghostly music filled the room. Then, in the dim light of the moon, I saw her, a figure, ethereal and beautiful, sitting at the piano. Her fingers danced across the keys, but her eyes were empty, her gaze fixed on some distant, invisible horizon. She was a phantom, a soul trapped in this house, by some unknown curse. The music she played was a mournful lament, a tale of lost love and unending sorrow. Her voice, barely more than a whisper, filled the room as she sang of her eternal torment and the curse that bound her to the mansion. With trembling hands, I approached the ghostly figure and whispered, "What happened to you?" She turned her empty eyes to me, and her voice grew more mournful as she spoke. "I was betrayed, and my love was taken from me. Now, I am trapped in this house, doomed to play this melody for all eternity. I wanted to help her, to free her from this curse, but I didn't know how." The room seemed to warp around me, as if the very walls were closing in. I could feel the presence of other trapped souls, their voices joining in the spectral chorus. In a desperate bid to escape, I fled the room, leaving the ghostly pianist behind. I returned to the master bedroom and lay in my sleeping bag, the melancholic melody echoing in my ears. I couldn't deny the truth any longer, the house was indeed haunted, and the spirits within were trapped in a never-ending nightmare. The night passed slowly, the music fading with the first light of dawn. My parents returned the following day, finding me pale and shaken, my resolve shattered. I told them what I had experienced, but they dismissed it as a fevered dream. To this day, I cannot forget the haunting melody of the abandoned house, the ghostly pianist, and the curse that binds her to that place. I cannot escape the fear that the spirits within the house may one day claim me as their own, that the cursed mansion will forever be a place of eternal torment. And so, I warn you, my dear audience, to heed the tales of the locals and be wary of the abandoned places you encounter. For within their walls may lie a world of darkness, a realm of pure horror that waits to ensnare the unwary, a place from which there may be no escape.